My memory of my early childhood is quite good. I wouldn't say that I'm sensitive to the paranormal at all. I'm just a regular old person. When I was about 4 years old, I owned a baby doll. This doll didn't look creepy or anything. The doll's entire body was made of hard plastic. The shoulder and hip joints, maybe the neck too, could bend, but none of the other joints could, such as the hands and feet, which were molded plastic shapes. The doll wore a long sleeved white onesie that had tiny purple triangles on it. Bald head, I think. I have no idea where I got this doll, or what brand it is, or anything. Just that I lived in BC, Canada at the time. This was around 2001. My parents can't remember the doll, which I think is kind of odd. So basically, the doll's hands would change. I can specifically remember my uncle placing the doll on the couch, with its arms out, and both hands completely open. Sometime after that, the hands would be in fists, or one hand would be opened and the other one would be closed. At the time, of course, I had no clue that this was weird whatsoever. I just tried to pry the plastic hands open when they were closed, swearing that they were open the last time I had checked, but to no avail. It's physically impossible for the hands to have changed, but they did. It wasn't a fancy or expensive doll either. I don't know if this was paranormal at all, but I'm pretty damn certain of what I saw. I have no idea where that doll is now. I gave most of my toys away when I was 6, when we had to move to another country. But sometimes I look back on that and wonder, what was up with that doll? My daughter has a toy doll. You squeeze its stomach and it giggles or says something like "Mama" or "Papa." Well, it used to anyway. She's been bringing it into the pool, the bath, her water table, etc. The electronic box inside stopped working about 2 weeks ago. Until the other night. The doll was laying on the bedroom floor, most definitely not being squeezed, and it made one of its voice box noises. It did several times that night. The first time it did, I shot right up and asked my husband where the doll was, if it was under the blankets and maybe I'd rolled on it. But it wasn't. It was on the floor, not being touched. After giving myself a talk off the ledge, I fell asleep. It did the same thing a couple of more times. We laughed about it in the morning, and my husband said that maybe it just dried out and started working again. So I grabbed it and squeezed it to see if that was the case. Nope. No matter how I squeezed, the voice box inside wouldn't make a peep. I don't really know what's going on with that doll, but I have no explanation for how the voice box started working without being touched when it's dead. When I was younger, about 5 years old, I had a baby doll. It was one of those weird mixes of cloth and plastic with a battery powered voice box. One day, this thing just started laughing constantly. It would not shut up. We took the batteries out, but it continued. We threw it outside and forgot about it for about a year when we finally found it. We found it again, and the damn thing could still laugh. At that point, it had been without a battery pack and laying outside for over a year. There's no reason that it should have laughed. One day, my mom put it in the trunk of her car to try to seal it off, and a few years later, she got into a bad accident that crushed the front and back end of her car. I know this isn't a typical story, but I still wind up thinking about it from time to time, just because of how creepy it was. Also, my mom's okay. The crash happened a few years ago. Still, I always think back on that doll and wonder how the hell it was laughing without any power source. So it's 6 a.m. right now. I couldn't really sleep after this. I first woke up at midnight, raised my head a bit, looked toward the door, and then realized that what had woken me was the really creepy voice of someone singing. Just by the sound of it, I could definitely tell that it was a doll and not a human. I was so tired that I didn't really realize what had just happened. The TV was on in the other room, so in my head I thought it might have been coming from that. In my really tired state, I just told myself, hell, if I had to own a doll, I'd shit myself right now, and went back to sleep. Then at 2 a.m., I heard the same creepy singing. This time, the TV was off. Honestly, the more awake I was getting, the more I was questioning what was actually going on. I realized that I wasn't imagining it, so I've been sat here for 4 hours now, thinking about how fucking real this is. I even googled it in the hope that it happened to someone else before. I'm so creeped out. Just thinking about that moment, I know that it was there, just in the other room. I feel like I even know what this doll looks like, even though I don't have dolls and I've never seen it. I have no idea what's going on. I'm still trying to figure out what I saw, or why I saw it. This is another paranormal account, like so many others of mine that took place when I was younger. The place that this event happened had many other unexplainable things take place in it. This is just one of the creepiest. I was probably 10 years old, and I was coloring by myself in my room. I heard a noise or something directly behind me, and when I turned around, there sat a ventriloquist doll. When I looked at him, he opened his mouth and eyes wide. I was completely frozen. When I finally could move, I ran into the living room where my mom and stepdad were. I don't think I said anything, but just sat on the couch, scared to go back into my bedroom. I never saw that particular item again. We had never owned a ventriloquist doll, and it never reappeared. But I did see other strange things, including my best friend, who I saw a spirit of in one room when she was actually in another room at the same time. I have no idea why I saw this thing or what it meant, but to this day I'm terrified of those dolls. When I was younger, my church took a bunch of us kids to Toys R Us. They gave us a budget and we could buy whatever we wanted for Christmas. When we went, we all ran around with our parents and chose the toys that we wanted. I got a Barbie set with clothes and a car. I also got a Polly Pocket closet and a few of the dolls. I got a few board games also, and finally they said we had 5 minutes left. I was near the actual dolls, so I rushed, looking for one that had brown hair, like mine. I finally found one with just 2 minutes to spare. She had brown hair and bangs, and her hair was half up. She had on a pink shirt, a denim jacket with the same color jeans, and she had a little pink phone in her hand with painted buttons. There was also a button in the palm of her other hand that allowed her to talk, but there was no feature for her to move. It was just a basic doll. That was it. I reached for it and grabbed it, but my sister was also getting toys. She liked it too, so we fought for it. Our mom told us to share it since it was the last one left, and we agreed. When we got home, we wrapped everything but the doll so we could open it and start playing. My sister and I ripped the box open and we played with the doll all day. When it was bedtime, we put her up on our bookshelf and went to sleep. I remember what happened because I woke up pretty late and automatically looked up at my bookshelf. The doll turned its head to look at me and moved its arm. I couldn't sleep all night watching it, so the next day I told my sister about it. She laughed at me. Nighttime came around again, and the doll had moved again. It moved its arms and head, and was not on the bookshelf. My sister freaked out and couldn't sleep, and I freaked out and hid under the covers. The next morning we told our stepdad, and he laughed. He said, "Oh, watch out, it's a Chucky situation." We brought the doll to him and told him to look at it. He jokingly started moving its arms and legs and then gave it back to us. We took it, and as soon as we did, it moved, so we threw it off the balcony. He went back down to get it, but then the doll moved in his arms, and he threw it over the balcony too. I have no idea what was going on with that doll, but we never picked it up again. I know the doll moved on its own, but it was brand new and had never been owned by anyone else at all. I don't know how it could have been haunted. To this day, I have no idea why that happened. I don't remember a lot of my childhood, but what I do remember will forever be ingrained in my memory. I was a wee little kid, around 5 to 6 years old, and I used to live in a 3-story blue house with my mom and dad. We had some birds and black cats as pets, and the house was down the street from the infamous Mummy Museum. I can't remember the name of it since I haven't gone back ever since my mom and I left. I remember on the weekends, if I was asleep early in the morning, my mom would go to the farmer's market and try to make it back before I woke up. This one time, I remember I woke up after she left, and I noticed there was a clown doll standing on its own, looking out the window toward the street. I got up out of bed, put it away in a toy chest-like dresser thing, went to the bathroom, and as I was walking back to bed to turn on the TV, the doll was in the middle of the floor, sitting facing the hallway that leads to the bathroom I had just come out of. That same night, I remember we had one of the nastiest rainstorms, with hail and thunder and lightning. I was able to fall asleep pretty early, even with the sound of thunder rumbling every inch of our house. I can't remember the exact dream I was having, but I remember trying to scream for help and running away from something, and no matter how loud I felt I was screaming in my dream, nobody could hear me. I remember waking up panting, crying, and trying to scream for my mom, but nothing came out. My heart dropped. I cried even more, and as lightning lit up the house, I got a glimpse of the creepy clown doll sitting upright on the living room table with a menacing grin on its face, a grin that it didn't have before. I believe the doll was possessed. I have no recollection of how I got it. I told my cousins, and they said that they had similar experiences with objects in their house. They lived a few houses away from mine, on the same street. I still don't have any explanation for what I encountered with that doll as a kid, but all of us seem to think that it might be connected to that museum. We have this toy that has a dozen different phrases. I'm home alone, and it says, I can see you. Not once, but twice, in about 10 minutes or so. I don't know all the phrases that it's programmed to say, so I can't say that that's not one of them, but I do know that nothing was touching it, so there was zero reason for it to go off. It's pretty new, so I also doubt that it's failing batteries. But even if that was the case, why hasn't it been making other sounds? Also, I can see you is about the creepiest phrase I can imagine, especially when it happens twice in about 10 minutes without anything being near it to set it off. I have no idea what to do with this thing. Ever since I was 5 years old, I've had an extreme fear of dolls. I am terrified of them. Now, I know that there are a lot of people who are, but when I reached the age of about 16, my mother finally told me where my fear may have come from. It's from a personal experience. To this day, I can never fully answer whether I believe in the paranormal or not, but my personal experience with a doll given to me by an aunt who practiced black magic haunts me until this day. When my mom told me this tale, I had minor flashbacks of the feeling that I had with this specific doll. From the first day I was born, I never slept properly. Never did, never have, and probably never will. I didn't cry or anything when I was awake early. I would just quietly play with my hands and wait for my mom to come get me. I did this from when I was an infant until I was a toddler. Around age 5, we had an aunt from my biological father's side visit us. Now, keep in mind that I have nothing to do with my biological father, and this aunt may have wished my mother harm. Fijians from that generation are typically very superstitious, and many of them believe in black magic. The things I began to do made us believe that there was something very wrong with this porcelain doll that she had given me as a gift. My mom began to notice that I would spend a lot of time with the doll. My younger brother, who would have been around 1 to 2 years old at that time, spent a lot of time with my mom. I was a very jealous child when he was first born, so at first she wasn't too surprised that I spent my time away from them. One morning she came to my bedroom and was surprised that I wasn't there. Like I said before, no matter what time I was awake at, I never got up without her. We had a basement that my brother and I were strictly forbidden from opening and going into, because the stairs were spaced quite far apart, and, being small, we could easily have fallen through or down onto the concrete. She had a lock put up on the high door, just in case. Besides that, the basement was freaky as hell, and I never even wanted to go in there alone. Ever. This particular morning, along with noticing that I was not in my usual place waiting for her, she noticed that this freakish doll wasn't there either. Before she called out my name, she heard me sniveling downstairs. As she climbed the stairs down toward me, she saw that doll sitting on the couch. She heard my crying get louder. As she got closer, she saw that I was trying to open the basement door lock while crying. "Sharissa, what the heck are you doing? Didn't I tell you to never go down there without me?" I started screaming and crying and ran to bury my face in her dress with relief. Such relief that she was there to stop me. I kept telling her, "Mommy, the doll made me. The doll made me," through my tears. I have no idea what this doll's name is anymore, but I apparently was saying the name of the doll instead of the doll. My mom, who is not a believer, was thoroughly creeped out, because she said that my tears and hysterical crying were not that of a child trying to find an excuse for getting caught doing something bad, but actual relief of being saved. She packed me up and we were off to my grandma's house, without the doll. We got rid of that doll stat. I know that this is a hard story to believe for anybody. I probably would have just played it off as me being a child and trying to blame the doll for getting caught. But I know that I never dared to get up without my mom because I was scared to get up by myself, and I liked the attention of her coming to get me out of bed every morning. I also have very creepy memories of some things about that doll that I'm still too scared to even think about, let alone write down. When I was about 8 or 9, my entire family went to a quinceañera. I guess we were good enough friends with the birthday girl that we received the quince doll, which is basically meant to look like the birthday girl. To give you an image of what it looked like, imagine a doll with a white dress and curly hair. We kept it in the living room where I slept on the floor, which is another story. And my brothers and I always had some weird feeling about it, like it was watching us. I'd say around 3 to 4 months of it being in the living room is when I started to notice weird things happen in not only the living room, but also in both of my brother's rooms. I'll start with my experiences first. Like I mentioned before, I used to sleep in the living room. I would lay down near my parents' door, and I would start to hear the strangest noises coming from near the TV, or near the small cabinet that we put the doll on display. From hearing things in the kitchen fall on the floor, to hearing a little girl laugh on the couch, a lot of weird things started to happen. I pretty much tried to ignore all of this with tears in my eyes, doing what kids do when they're scared. I covered myself with a blanket. But one experience will forever haunt me, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was crying one night for Lord knows what. My brother tells me it's because I was claiming I heard voices near my ear. My parents didn't believe me and told me that I was delusional. He invited me into his room to sleep, and I jumped at the opportunity. Just before entering his room, I went to the restroom. It's literally right next to my brother's room. While I was in there, I felt someone's hand right on my shoulder. I immediately turn around and get freaked out. I hurried up and got out of there, but that wasn't the worst thing. I entered his room and slept on his bed while he just played on the PS3. I slept from maybe around 20-ish minutes to 30 before waking up to him coming in the room with food. I kid you not, the moment he sat down, the closet door swung open with enough force to hit the wall. We looked at each other in disbelief about what we just saw. My dad burst in to ask what the hell was going on. We tried explaining it to him, but he just shook it off and told us to go back to sleep. He walked out of the room and my brother continued to play. We were trying our best not to talk about it, when we hear the toilet just flush on its own, along with the shower curtain moving. Mind you, nobody was in there. We would have known, since the door always creaks open and shut with a pretty distinct sound. That room, I'd like to say, is where most of the activity always happened. The guy that we let rent out that room always said he was scared of it, but because he needed a place to stay, he just dealt with it. That was my experience when I was younger. But now, let me tell you about my older brothers. I'll start with the youngest of my older brothers. We'll call him Dave. Dave slept in the room on the other side of the house, completely away from the doll, but with a massive window that had a hole within the curtains. He had things happen in the afternoon, like tools being thrown from one side of the room to the other, the TV falling, and unexplainable scratches on his chest. But the one thing that scared the heck out of me was that he had this dream. In the dream was the girl in the white dress. Let me clarify, not the doll, but a girl. This happened to both of my brothers. The dream started off normally, until he noticed the white-dressed girl at his school and went near her. She turned around, and as he remembers, she didn't have eyes. It was just black holes, and she had a sad expression on her face. He woke up to my parents trying to calm him down. I remember being right outside his room, peeking in. He was legit crying his eyes out, and I've never seen him act that way before. I have another older brother. We'll call him Mark. I believe that he had the worst of it, since he slept not even 5 feet away from the doll. He also had a dream about the girl in the dress and the doll as well. But his dream wasn't scary, just anxiety-inducing, in my opinion. All he remembers is sitting at the dinner table. The doll was not too far away from the table. It was right in front of the table, if I remember correctly. The girl with the white dress was sitting across from him, with the doll next to her. Apparently the doll was blinking, and the girl was emotionless, not blinking whatsoever. This is when he started to hear a clock tick. It ticked and ticked and ticked, until he suddenly woke up in a cold sweat. But the problem was, when he woke up, the doll wasn't in the cabinet. Instead, it was right in front of him. He screamed and threw it toward the closet, breaking the head of the thing. My mom came in and thought somebody had broke in. She saw the doll with the broken head on the floor. And the creepiest thing was that the doll was upright, with the head right behind it. While she was extremely angry, she was just glad that he was safe, and she threw the doll out. That was the end of it, really. A few more things did happen, but nothing as bad as what I just told you about. Needless to say, we're glad the doll is gone. My uncle was such a sweet guy that for my 18th birthday, he gifted me with a creepy but adorable porcelain clown sitting on a swing. It had 2 red dots on the cheeks, a red nose, a frilly costume, and white gloves. It had a pointed hat and brown curly hair. What he didn't know was that I had an extreme fear of clowns, and I still do. I accepted it anyway, because it was such a sweet gift. I hung it up on my curtain rod, kind of proud that he had even thought of me at all, because it was rare that he gave me presents. The first week was fine, but after that, weird things began to happen. I started to grow creeped out by this doll to the point where I wouldn't even get dressed in my own room. There were a few times where it would swing on its own. I never opened my window, so I know that it wasn't the wind, and it wouldn't have been able to swing without some sort of force. Several times I would walk out of the room and come back in to find that the head had twisted to look outside my door. For a long time, I thought it was my family members playing a joke on me because they knew that I didn't like clowns, so I just grinned and put up with it. I also locked my door from the inside with one of those bolt locks, just in case. I did this for a couple of months. One morning, it was taken too far, and it was the last straw for me. I woke up and hit something with my hand. I turned my head to come face to face with the clown doll. I looked at the curtain rod, but it definitely was not there. The only way it could have been brought down was if you lifted the rod and took the doll off by the swing ring. I know for a fact that my family didn't do it, because my bedroom door was still bolted shut. I had had enough, and I took the doll and threw it in the big bin, and then put it on the verge for the bin man to come that day. I told my uncle that I had accidentally broken it when I was putting it away to paint my room. I actually regret doing that. I kind of wish I had kept it. I was creeped out by stuff like that when I was younger, but now I love haunted stuff and creepy things. I kind of wish I had it hanging in my house. This happened when I was in the 4th grade, during Christmas time, around 2014. I live in Salem, Oregon, which is relevant to the story. Downtown, there's this antique store called the Unicorn. We went there to get my older brother World War II stuff for Christmas because he likes that kind of thing. It's a really big store for an antique shop, so like normal kids, my brother and I went off to explore. Around the front of the shop, past a couple of bookcases, was this kids section. It was mostly full, with old board games and those tin toys, like those red geese with blue hats. What I did find was this old doll with a sticker on its face, just all dirty and broken. It said, "Cursed Doll," on this piece of paper, with a warning sign at the bottom. I don't really remember what the warning sign said. Being 10 years old, I just looked at it and called bull, and then flicked the glass and told the doll that it needed Jesus. Later that night I went to sleep and had a dream of a green face in a dark background that kept trying to eat me. I woke up all gross and sweaty, but I realized that the bathroom light was on. My room is connected to the bathroom, so it's not outside my room in the hallway like in most people's houses. So when I woke up, I could clearly see the light reflecting off my wall. I could hear the light switch being turned on and off, but the light was still on. Eventually the light turned off, but the switch kept on flicking. Then the banging on my wall happened, and it lasted for a good 2 minutes. It just kept getting louder and louder, and then all I remember is not being able to breathe and passing out. When I woke up the next morning, I asked my brother why he kept banging on my wall. He said that he was at a friend's house last night, so he couldn't have banged on the wall. That scared the crap out of me. I told my dad what happened, and he believes that I pissed off whatever possessed that doll or made it cursed. I don't really mess with that stuff anymore, but cool story, I guess. When I was younger, between the ages of 7 to 10, I lived in a small house in Missouri. We lived in a small town. Nothing was abnormal about the house. I mean, there were the normal house settling noises which would cause me to have nightmares frequently, but nothing else. Until this incident, the only weird thing that had ever happened was our keys had gone missing. When you walked in the door, there was a giant metal wood stove that we would put our keys on. They went missing for weeks. We destroyed the house looking for them, and one day they just reappeared and nobody knew where they came from. Anyway, there was a doll back when I was younger called an Amazing Grace doll. She had holes in her ears so that she could hear you, and she would turn her head to wherever the noise had come from and would say, "Mama." Well, I loved this doll. I explicitly remember cleaning my room and propping Grace against the wall so she was sitting up. I laid down on my bed to read, and I heard the clicking she would make when her head turned. So I looked up and stared at her and got the normal "Mama" that she would say after she heard something. So I tossed my book down and picked her up to make sure that she was turned off. She was. So I flipped her switch and then flipped it back to off, thinking that this was just a normal malfunction. I sit her back in her spot and plop down to continue reading. It's completely quiet. As soon as I start reading, I hear the sound of her head moving again, and she says, "Mama." So I went and took out all of her batteries. I was over it at this point, so I just kind of tossed her on the ground and got back into my spot. That's when she started clicking quicker. Her head was moving back and forth, and she just kept saying, "Mama, Mama." I took off. I ran to get my dad, and he saw it and decided that we would burn the little doll. We did, and nothing happened again to my recollection, but my nightmares got worse. This was when I was still religious, so I would put all my stuffed animals around me in a circle to protect me. I had a turquoise dream catcher, and I would pray every night for the nightmares to go away. They never did, until we moved. They weren't every day, but definitely several times a week. Regardless, I was very glad to get out of that house and away from that doll. I bought a little porcelain doll at the Salvation Army this past weekend. I used to collect them as a little girl, and it was cheap, so why not? I wanted something to scare the trick-or-treaters that came into work. Since I've had the doll, I've had a horrible time sleeping. My house feels strange, and when I'm up at night and alone, I feel uneasy. I'm sleeping with the covers over my head. Any small sound makes my heart flip, and I can't sleep very well. It reminds me of the terrible nights I had sleeping as a child and being afraid. Even during the day, when I'm alone and getting ready for work, I feel so off in the house. It's been the past few days since I've bought that doll and kept her in the house. Today I brought her into work, and I'm hoping that the strange feelings I have at home will subside. Maybe I'm just being jumpy since it's Halloween, but I'm 26 and I haven't had these feelings since I was a child. Has anybody else had a similar experience? About a week or so ago, I received an Elmo doll. I was on vacation, visiting a few relatives, and my 90-year-old great aunt gave me this red Elmo plush. At first, everything was normal about it, nothing out of the ordinary. However, the activity began when I returned back home. I placed the doll on my bed and lied down to sleep for the night. During the night, I began to see shadows moving across my room, and a feeling that I was being watched. Of course, I at first thought I was just imagining things, so I brushed it off. The next night, however, things started to get weird. The number of shadows moving around my room increased, and I felt like there was something standing over me, watching me. I put two and two together and grabbed the doll. My stomach began to feel nauseous. A sense of anxiety filled me when I held the doll, and I felt like a negative energy was being transferred into my body. I immediately removed the doll from my room and placed it in a different area of the house. I told my parents, but they just joke about it and think I'm crazy. But I swear there's something wrong with this doll, and I have no idea how to go about investigating it. So, I know this is really weird, but I have always been obsessed with the idea of having a haunted item. So I went on eBay and I did a very thorough search of trusted sellers and stores where I might buy haunted items. I eventually settled on my doll Evelyn because the seller stated that the vessel was inhabited by the spirit of Evelyn, who died at age 17 and had hopes of going to college and being a teacher. I felt a connection to her there because I am currently a senior at university and I'm about to start working as an English teacher. I hope to read to Evelyn often and ask her advice for my lesson plans. I even fantasize about giving her a place in the classroom to sit so she can still achieve her dreams. Update. So the first day and night with Evelyn, and I only have a couple of out of the ordinary things to report. First off, my cat won't stop rubbing against the doll or sniffing it. And secondly, I fell asleep last night with my TV on, watching South Park on Hulu, which means that my DVD player was also on. I woke up at 1 a.m. to both of those things being shut off. Now I know that there's probably a logical explanation for that, but honestly, I'm kind of hoping it's just her. Update Night 2. Nothing happened last night that I know of, except that I woke up at 2 a.m. for no reason, but that's becoming typical for me anyway. Today, as I was getting ready for class, I turned on a paranormal story time on YouTube. Right after, my door that had been shut opened by itself about a quarter of the way. My cat and I both shot our heads to the door when that happened to look. And I know y'all will probably say I'm stupid for this, but I used the Ghost Radar app, and it said that there was an entity right in the direction of where my door is. I'll let you know if there are any further updates. I was really young when this happened. I don't even think I'd started going to school yet. I don't remember much about that stage of my life, but I still think about this experience to this day. It was near Christmas, and there was a doll that my younger sister and I looked forward to playing with every year. It was an angel, where if you pressed a button she would sing Silent Night. The thing is though, once I was done playing with it, I had to return it downstairs. My parents eventually realized that we had forgotten to bring it down, so I was sent upstairs alone to retrieve it. As I went up to my room to get it, I heard the doll sing Silent Night. The doll had a history of going off on its own, so I thought nothing of it. I went up and opened the door. My room was completely dark at the time, but when the light from the hallway came on, it shined on the pitch-black figure of a little girl who was playing with the doll. The girl immediately turned her eyes on me, and I stared back at her, shocked. My vision blurred, and my ears were ringing, and the next thing I knew, I had to pick myself up from the ground. Nobody seemed to notice that I hadn't come back downstairs. Confused and unable to comprehend what had happened, I would just go downstairs with the doll, seeing as the girl had left. I returned the doll and carried on with my day because I had no idea what had happened. It wasn't until I looked back on it when I was older that I realized just how terrifying that was. And this is my story about a haunted doll named Claire. She's been featured in the book Haunted Objects, Stories of Ghosts on Your Shelves, a couple of paranormal podcasts, and the TV show Haunted Towns that aired on Destination America back in 2017. You can still catch reruns of the show on Travel Channel every now and then. She was in the season finale, featuring Count Georgia. Here's my story. As an 8-year-old child, I was given an old porcelain doll by a very dear family friend, Miss Marion. She was all the time coming across things and giving them to me. This doll was the last thing she gave me. I was never really into dolls at all growing up, but I took the doll and placed her in my room in a small child-sized rocking chair. The chair sat next to my closet and dresser, right beside my nightlight. The doll was very pretty. She was dressed in a peach and cream colored dress with an apron and petticoats. She had little black Mary Jane shoes that, when removed, showed her delicately painted toenails. Her body was soft. Only her head, forearms, hands, and legs from the knee down were porcelain. Her lips were pink, and her dark brown hair hung in slightly frizzed and now loose curls. Her eyes were brown, her cheeks were a rosy peach color, all like mine. Miss Marion made a point of saying that the doll reminded her of me, which is why she gave her to me. From the moment that doll, which I named Claire, came into my house, things began to happen. I was always uneasy with Claire. I never wanted to touch her, and when I played in my room, it was as if she watched me. It wasn't anything to panic about, but I do remember feeling like if I did something wrong, she might actually tell on me. How ridiculous does that sound? My first real occurrence that I remember was when I was reading in my room, ghost stories actually, when a musical carousel horse that sat on my dresser began to play. Not just a couple of notes like old mechanical music boxes will do from time to time, but like somebody just wound it up fully. I sat, stunned, and stared at the little horse as it moved up and down in time with the music. Then it just stopped. It didn't wind down, it just stopped. I was a pretty brave kid. I didn't run, and I didn't tell my mom. I used to see a shadow man in the hallway or in my parents' bedroom door all growing up, and if she didn't believe me about that, she wouldn't believe me about something as mundane as a music box playing on its own, so I just let it go. The next thing that happened was the voice. For several nights, and on into these years, I was awoken by what sounded like a woman, inches from my face, shouting my name. "Jill, wake up!" I would jump up and sit up to find my room empty. Those happenings died down after a few months. She then started to plague my little brother with the same thing, and now that he and I are grown and gone, she's moved on to my dad. The little things started to get to me. I'd put something in a certain place, only to find it later on the floor or on my dresser, right next to Claire. All of my missing items eventually turned up around her. Once, a ring ended up in the pocket of her apron. Books would fall off my shelves, and a perfume smell would sometimes fill my room. The doll itself didn't smell at all, but the air around her would. My catalyst to finally getting Claire out of my room was the night I woke up after hearing thumping around in my closet. I opened my eyes, sat up in bed, and of course my eyes were drawn to the nightlight, where Claire sat. I realized that it wasn't coming from in the closet, but near it. As I watched, the source of the thumping became clear. The rocking chair that Claire occupied was rocking on its own. I had thick shag carpet, so there was no way this thing was just rocking by chance. If that wasn't enough, Claire's feet, which were both turned to the side facing opposite each other, slowly straightened themselves to both be pointing directly up. 20 years later, this part still freaks me out. Then she turned her head, which was quite impossible to do since it was attached, fixed to her cloth body. She looked toward me, and every music box in my room, 4 of them to be exact, started to play all at once. I was frozen with fear. I didn't feel endangered so much as I just felt scared of what was happening. I screamed for my mom and dad. The music stopped, but Claire maintained her gaze in my direction. And this is why I hate dolls. Even after that, I couldn't get rid of Claire totally. I ended up stuffing her in a box in the back of a storage closet. She's still there as far as I know. So is the woman who now screams my dad's name in the middle of the night. While I think she explains some of the oddities that happen in my parents' house, I don't think she's the tie to all of it, especially the Shadow Man. My friend Tim Weisberg is a paranormal radio and podcast host of the show Spooky South Coast, and also is an author. He asked me to lend him Claire once. He heard my story back in 2011. I obliged, and Claire went to stay with him for a few months. He wrote about his experiences with Claire while she stayed with him in the book Haunted Objects that I mentioned earlier. Temperature changes in the room that she stayed in, along with hearing voices, were 2 of his noted encounters. Claire also stayed briefly at the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast in 2012. The guys from the Haunted Towns show encountered some things in my parents' house while Claire was with them. I've worked for the Disneyland Hotel for over a year. I work in one of the many departments that would need to deliver things from our department to the guest rooms whenever a guest needed them. One night at around 11:30 p.m., I was making a delivery when I heard a group of children laughing from the pool deck, which is surrounded by a gate. Since I was headed to a guest room and they had been given a wait time so they knew when to expect me, I didn't stop to see who was playing in the pool and to check that they were at least being monitored by an adult. After delivering what the guest needed to the room, I headed back to where I was supposed to be waiting when I heard more children laughing from the pool deck, as well as some splashing. Since the pool water itself is well lit and the pool deck is poorly lit, I expected to at least be able to see some kids playing in the pool, and something resembling an adult within easy hearing range. By the time I had walked up to the gate, which is covered in plants, the laughing and splashing had stopped, and I could see that there was no one anywhere near the pool or the pool deck. It really makes me wonder what I heard. While I know that there have been deaths at the hotel and in its rooms, most recent deaths happening weeks before this posting, all of the deaths have been adults, making me wonder why I was so sure of what I was hearing. I've also been deaf in my left ear since childhood, so any sounds that I did hear would have had to have been very, very loud. I'm still not sure how to explain that experience. In November of 2016, my family takes me to Disneyland. We stay at an Airbnb, the whole deal. We go back to Disneyland the same day at 11 o'clock at night, trying to make the most of our money. I walk through the gates and everything goes silent. I hear the stuffed animals that people walk past me with saying, "Help me, they're going to kill me." As soon as I walk through, clear as day, I saw and felt a world of genocide. People on the floor, middle of the day, crows picking at their bodies, everybody on the balconies, without eyes. I thought that I was the only one left on Earth. 30 seconds later, it was over. I never saw it again, and I never told my family. If anyone has any experiences or answers, please tell me. The other night, I couldn't get back to sleep after my husband woke me up and told me that he saw a woman in a white nightgown at the foot of our bed. The woman was standing on my side of the bed, just looking, not my husband's side. I would have written it off as sleep paralysis, but about 7 years ago, I might have seen the same figure. I was house sitting at a friend's house and saw this lady in a white nightgown floating above me, looking straight at me. I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't move my body. Suddenly, she just went away. I wonder if this woman that my husband saw is the same woman that I saw 7 years ago. However, I don't live in the same place where I saw this figure when I was younger. I used to live in Hawaii, but about 4 months ago we moved to Missouri into our new home that was built about 15 years ago. My husband and I get the feeling that our place may be haunted, but I'm not sure. I wonder if it's just our imagination. So far, we have experienced the security alarms going off for no reason. I've seen all of the lights shut completely off for like 5 seconds. Both my husband and I have seen our walk-in closet door open on its own when it was completely shut, which we think could possibly be due to the temperature of the room. I'm not sure though. I have felt a poke in my back, but I'm not sure if I'm just imagining things. I'm thinking about getting the house blessed because I'm really freaked out. I don't know if something followed me from Hawaii or if this is a completely different entity altogether. So, I've got about 3 possible glitch in the Matrix experiences, but this one is the major one. I was living with my brother on the island of Lanai in Hawaii doing construction on a hotel. This must have happened maybe a month or so into the job. When I got home from work one day, I noticed that I had a notification on my phone from Facebook. It was a reply to a message I had made. I didn't remember responding to anyone's post recently, so I was confused. When I checked the Facebook post, I was flabbergasted to discover that I had indeed replied to somebody. The post was a picture of a pillow with coordinates on it. They were for the city of Kihei, Maui. Someone made a comment saying that they had a dog named Kihei. My comment in reply to this was it an ugly dog? And the reply to that was something like, are you saying that Kihei is ugly? So my brother and I had lived in Kihei for about 8 months before moving to Lanai. I had some good and bad times there, but that was mostly due to issues with my brother and being an alcoholic. So when we moved to Lanai, my brother and I made it a commitment not to drink. And there was only one bar in town that we lived in, which closed at 11. So you would think that the reason that I don't remember writing would be that I must have been blackout drunk the night before, but I know for sure that this was not the case. The reason I think it might be an alternate personality coming out was because the post was very mean, and I'm not a mean person. I kind of go out of my way in my mind to be too nice sometimes, maybe as a way to avoid conflict or just be more likable, I'm not really sure. But that was the only time in my life that something like that had happened, and nothing like it has ever happened since. Needless to say, I was freaked out. The person who posted the pillow picture, I didn't even know that well. I had her number because she was a neighbor of ours in Maui, and we got some substances from her once in a while. I messaged her to apologize as best I could and then proceeded to delete Facebook, which I regret because there were still some pictures on there that I wish I had today. But anyway, that's the story. Definitely one of the freakiest experiences of my life. Tonight I was having dinner at the Mauna Lani golf course on the Big Island of Hawaii. I had to use the restroom pretty badly, so I had my husband hold my things as I rushed into the women's restroom around the corner. Normally I get a creepy vibe from public restrooms anyway, but this time it was a lot more than that. I had a tight feeling in my chest as soon as I walked in. There were 4 stalls, and only the second one was closed. I quickly glanced underneath that second stall to check if it was occupied, and it was empty. All of a sudden, I started hearing this wailing sound that progressively got louder as I got closer to the third stall, which I had decided to use. The sound got so loud and terrifying that I just couldn't do it and decided to bolt out of there. As soon as I turned around and started to run, I heard something coming after me. I fumbled with the door a bit because I forgot that it was a pull instead of a push. Once I finally turned out of the corner, the footsteps behind me stopped. There was still nobody there. I saw my husband and said, "Fuck that." He looked confused. I still had to go pretty badly though, so I decided to just make him come with me. I forced him to enter the women's restroom. At this point, I didn't really care if anybody walked in. As I expected, the noise was gone. I entered the third stall just like I had planned initially, and while I was hanging up my purse, a few charms from my bracelet got caught and broke off. In an effort to make myself feel better, I thought, maybe that sound was just from the toilet flushing or filling back up. Maybe it was the vents. I flushed the toilet hoping that I was right, but it did not make that wailing sound. I washed my hands as quickly as I could and rushed the hell out of there. If you've ever been to use the women's restroom at the Mount Alani golf course next to Shiono, and you've had a similar experience, please let me know. I'm terrified about what the hell just happened, and I'm wondering if I was just imagining things. I used to live on a military base in Hawaii. My father was in the Navy, and there wasn't much to do there. I don't know exactly what my age was at the time, maybe around kindergarten? Hawaii didn't require kindergarten at the time, so I wasn't in school yet. I know that at least. Outside of our house, there was a covered car park that people in the community used, because the houses didn't have garages and there were various storm drains that were around the car park. I would always play there since it was right outside of our house. Not the brightest, but kids are dumb, right? So one day I was playing there and I thought it would be fun to drop things down the storm drain to see how far they went. I had dropped a couple of rocks and some small sticks, and eventually I ran out of things to throw, so I started saying, "Hello?" to hear my echo. I didn't expect to hear anything other than my own voice, so I was surprised when I got a response. A little girl called back to me. I wasn't scared, I was just confused. I asked her what she was doing down there, and she said that she and her family lived down there. I remember that I kept trying to look closer in, but it was so dark you couldn't see the bottom at all. The storm drain went straight down and was covered by a grate, not like the drain that Pennywise used. We sat for a while and talked. I don't remember the whole conversation, but it went on for a while. I vividly remember the last part of it though, because I felt so guilty and hurt. Years later I still do, even though I'm not sure this even happened. She wanted to play with me, and I said that I could invite her in for dinner, and she got really excited by that idea. So I ran inside and asked my mom if my friend could come over for dinner. She said no, and she wouldn't let me go back out to tell her. The next day I went out to explain to my friend what had happened, but she wasn't there. I never heard from the little girl in the drain ever again. I remember crying that day. I blamed my mom for losing the only friend that I had made there. I would like to write this off, saying that it was just my imagination considering how young I was. But my mom still remembers this happening and how upset I was, and that I told her that she made me lose a friend. So, maybe it did. I rented a condo in Hawaii at the Hilton Turtle Bay on the north shore of Oahu. FYI, I can get a condo for a week on the hotel grounds for cheaper than a 2-day stay at the hotel, so that's what I did. I arrived from California, put my stuff down, and headed out for the beach. After dark, I came back and eventually went to bed. The main bedroom was upstairs. As I'm trying to go to sleep, a woman screams at me from a couple of feet away, telling me to leave. It was really more like, "Get the fuck out." I'm shocked and rattled a bit. I say to myself, this is just a hypnagogic hallucination, and I try to make myself go back to sleep. I fall asleep and get screamed at again a few minutes later. I got out of bed and I remember actually saying out loud to myself, "Shit, rented a haunted condo." Then I said, "I'm not leaving. I paid for a week. Leave me alone and I won't sleep in your bedroom, but I'm not leaving." The next day my good friend shows up. I tell him he can sleep in the main bedroom and he gives me a calculating look. So that night, after some fun adventures, he heads upstairs to go to sleep. I sit on the couch awaiting the news. He comes down 30 minutes later and says that I'm a total dick for not warning him about my bedroom. I innocently asked, "What are you talking about?" He said that some lady was screaming at him upstairs. I cracked up and told him that he's gonna have to sleep on the couch. I moved into an old inn up by the University of Hawaii Manoa campus. Real creepy area. For a college area, you would think that there would be more people out and about, but if I ever drove down into the Manoa Valley at night, it just felt abandoned. Barely a light on in any of the houses. Anyway, I was dating a local, and one day at work, my buddies and I got to talking about ghosts and things that we felt while on patrol at night. Obviously, there's a lot of energy surrounding Pearl Harbor. So when I got home, I messaged her and we started talking about my day. No ghosts yet. One of the questions that I asked her was basically how come she never came to my apartment? Why did I always have to go to her place to visit? In the most serious tone she's ever had, she says, "Do you really want to know?" "It's because I can see things." Of course I want to know more, so I'm like, "Define things." And she proceeds to tell me that after her father passed away, she was able to see spirits or whatever, and because the Manoa Valley had a violent history, I guess in old Hawaiian tribal history, she didn't like going down there because it was overwhelming. Needless to say, this didn't make me feel comfortable at all, living in my old-ass little studio apartment in this creepy old mansion that was turned into an inn by the owners. So now our conversation moves to what I talked about at work, about how I was super weirded out now, because before it was just guys talking, but now my girlfriend's telling me she can see dead people, and things are taking a turn for the strange, and I'm not liking it. I tell her that I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight because I'm officially creeped the hell out. She proceeds to tell me not to worry. She's going to send her grandmother over to keep me company, which she explains won't be her grandmother's ghost, but her grandmother's spirit, and that this sweet old lady's spirit is going to protect me. Yeah, that didn't help me any, but she reassured me that everything would be fine. Grandma would sing me to sleep and comfort me. Don't worry. No way that I'm sleeping that night. No way in hell. Well, guess who passed out shortly after we hung up the phone and slept like a damn baby? This guy. Supposedly because of her grandmother. But there was this one thing that woke me up. Around 3 a.m., a beer bottle I had in my sink fell over, woke me up for a fraction of a second. I didn't think twice and I went back to sleep. Go to work, come home, call the girlfriend, and she has a smart-ass tone in her voice and says, "So how did you sleep last night?" Proceeded to do the whole "I told you so" thing about her grandma comforting me and keeping me safe. And then she goes, "I'm really sorry about the beer bottle. My grandma didn't mean to disturb you and wake you, but she did make sure you went back to sleep." Yeah, I was creeped out about that for the longest time. Nothing major ever happened after that. I broke up with the girl a couple of months later, but I'll tell you what, crazy couple of months, that's for sure. I'm not sure where exactly this story fits, or even how to explain what happened that night, but I would love some feedback or insight. I was living in Hawaii temporarily on the Big Island. I was working on an organic farm in the Hawaiian jungle for a witch doctor and shaman. He was such a wonderful guy. I had no cell service in that part of the island, unless I climbed this huge hill for 1 bar. This hill was made of cinder and lava rock and was created by a lava flow back in the 60s. It was about 100 feet high, maybe taller. The climb was difficult but feasible. One night I was very distraught because somebody that I had been traveling with and had trusted became extremely abusive and controlling. I had been keeping my husband informed back on the mainland and frequently checked in with him. I had suspicions that this friend was trying to trap me on the island with him and break up my husband and I. He had been trying to gaslight me and wipe out my self-esteem. The other people that I was traveling with were too scared to stand up to the guy. We got in a huge screaming match that day where I basically put him in his place and told him that I wanted nothing to do with him. I started making plans to ditch him and go work on a different farm. The witch doctor agreed. After dark, I go to the room that I was renting, laid down, and tried to calm myself to sleep. I woke up to realize that I had dozens of little fire ants in bed with me and had gotten stung all over. If you're not familiar, little fire ant stings suck. That was really the coup de grace of an already crappy few days. Against my better judgment, I slid out of bed, shook the fire ants off, grabbed my headlight, and began to trek up the treacherous hill to go talk to my husband. It was pitch black, and when I looked up, I could see the Milky Way. I took the meandering path to the base of the hill and climbed it. When I got there, I dialed my husband. Hawaii was 6 hours behind my hometown, so it was in the early morning hours for him. During the day, people mine the lava rock there and sell it to customers to decorate their yards. While I was talking to him, I suddenly got the horrible sensation that I was being watched from afar. I got the feeling that someone, or something, was up there with me. Something felt very wrong, and my intuition screamed that I was in danger. At first I thought it was somebody living up there that was just investigating me. I listened for footfalls. Nothing. I had been up there during the day and had gotten a really bad vibe before that I had just brushed off as the unknown. The hill was like a narrow cliff, and it was easy to slip off either side because of the unstable lava rock. The feelings I got were unusual because I felt like it hated me and wanted me dead, almost like it wanted to scare me or even push me off the cliff. I was no stranger to this feeling because I've had other experiences in my hometown that gave me similar sensations. This is where it gets really odd. The air became very heavy and thick. It was suffocating. The insects went silent. The frogs stopped chirping. I could have heard a leaf fall, it was so silent. My breath caught in my chest as I froze. It was like the normal sounds of the outside all went silent at once. The feeling of being watched felt closer and more intense. My headlight dimmed, and this massive black thing engulfed me. It not only engulfed me, but my surroundings as well. I couldn't see the trees or the stars. The only thing that I could see was a few feet in front of my face from the feeble light coming from my headlamp. I was totally surrounded. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was terror unlike anything I have ever felt before. My light got dimmer and dimmer, and this thing felt like it was closing in, gradually, closer and closer. I got the feeling that it was going to push me off the precipice I was standing on. The anxiety I felt was pure fight or flight. I felt a wave after wave of adrenaline surge through my body. I began to shake all over and my knees became weak. I was totally surrounded and engulfed by this black thing. It was the blackest black I've ever experienced. The blackness looked alive somehow. I had never seen anything this dark in my entire life. It felt sentient, like it knew what it was doing. I could barely think. It felt as though I was being embraced by death. If I so much as breathed, I would die. Finally, it was just too close for comfort. I whipped around in circles and snarled, "Leave me alone! Now! Get away from me!" in my most aggressive, bigger than I felt tone. I tried to sound as mean and as threatening as possible. I know the sound of my voice had to carry on for miles in each direction. In a split second, I felt the heaviness and suffocating sensation disappear. My light was no longer dim. I could see the trees and the stars again. The frogs and the insects gradually started chirping again. Whatever had been there had gone. I hauled ass down that hill, slipping and sliding most of the way. I went back up there during the day over the next few days, and in some parts, it still had a bad vibe. I've given it a lot of thought, and I can't make sense of it. Can anyone tell me what I experienced that night?